So my fear really, honestly, is that it stays the same, right? Is that we don't make progress. That is so if you and I are talking in 2030 and I'm sort of giving you the same, gosh, I hope things work out speech, that's my fear. I don't see that happening. But I would definitely like if you're, my realistic fear is just that, right? Is that we're not able to be successful in really getting this out there and demonstrating what low income home ownership can provide and the efficiency and just so many things that really manufactured housing solves. And it's really so much of it just tied, getting back to the start here, right? Of just that initial stigma of if you don't know what a manufactured home is, your sort of knee jerk based case that it's bad, right? It's gross, it's trailer trash, whatever.
All right. Welcome to the Manufactured Home Connection. I have a treat today, Mr. Andrew Cramer from Bridgeport Capital. Andrew, please tell me a little bit about yourself.
Hey man, thanks for having me, Eric. I appreciate it. Always enjoy getting to talk about Bridgeview and the industry in general. So I started Bridgeview about 15 years ago. We operate exclusively in the Pacific Northwest. We've had as many as about 2,000 units under management, and then through a couple of consolidations and portfolio sales, we currently manage about 1,000 units, and are actively acquiring new properties in the region and really just trying to be proponents of affordable housing. And the other big passion for the company is to really bring manufactured housing as a critical solution to bringing affordable housing, particularly to a very high cost region like the Pacific Northwest. So we obviously want to generate great returns for our investors, but we're also very passionate about really using manufactured housing as a tool to solve affordable housing.
Excellent. Excellent. Yeah. And the reason we created the Manufactured Home Connection is to increase the awareness of manufactured homes for the average consumer, the investor, the community owner, and the dealer. And why I wanted to bring you on board is because, I mean, you have a lot of doors that you deal with. I'm going to go into some quick questions here on, first of all, what got you in the manufactured home business?
Yeah, great question. For me, it was at one point I got a little bit of experience in real estate, sort of construction. I started a medical business of all things, but got to participate in the build out of a medical office space, really from like a cold shell, and that I just got really interested. I like the idea of creating things, and my wife and I moved to the Northwest back in 2010, and at that time, kind of mid climbing out of the recession, and I just couldn't really get much traction in apartments or other asset types, and just kind of at one point I was staying with some friends in California, and we stayed in a double wide mobile home. It was a rent, and I'd never been in a mobile home before, and walking in and realizing that it's just like anything else. It's a home, and I felt fine, and it was clean, and it really sort of I think there's a lot of standard stereotypes about manufactured homes that can very quickly be deconstructed when you go into an actual mobile home and you realize that it's not junky, it's not falling over. And so from there, I just kind of learned more about it, toured some factories, and then bought my first park at the end of 2010 and kind of went from there. So it was more kind of, for me, it was about deconstructing the stigma around manufactured housing. And then from there, turning it into a business and much more of a passion was relatively easy, to be honest, because you just see it through a totally different lens, and you see the people and the opportunities that you have for like low income home ownership, for example, that doesn't exist anywhere else. So that my start was, I started with deconstructing my own biases and my own stigmas about it, and that was really
Awesome. Yes. Once you tour the factories, it gives you a whole different perspective of manufactured homes, right? I mean, these factories now these manufactured homes, 2x6 construction, the 9 foot flat ceilings. Tell me what's your favorite part, or which is your favorite factory that you like to carry right now? Do you have a factory in particular?
we do a lot of different things. So we work. We've built our own homes. We are obviously a dealer in the markets where we operate. And I've been in many. I've probably been in at least a half dozen of the larger factories. I've also talked to a lot of like the smaller kind of tiny home type manufacturers. I'd say what impresses me the most is walking into like, the Palm Harbor factory in Millersburg, Oregon, for example, where you see this giant 400,000 square foot building. You see the efficiency One of the things I love is the lack of waste. You know, when they're framing in walls, for example, every little piece of 2x4 gets reused. It gets reused as blocking for a window or backer for a cabinet or something. So there's just no waste. And then you go in there in the middle of February, which in the Northwest, it's always pouring down rain and everything's dry. Everything's the same temperature. So you learn to have such a respect for what offsite construction can offer. And then just not only the efficiencies, but the safety, and just the sort of production and how you can convert from what is sort of like everyone's showing up on site and dumping materials down and sort of dirty and there's water intrusion like seeing that versus seeing these just amazing structures get constructed literally on a line, on an assembly line. And so for me, I see that as just, man, we should be doing this way more. Unfortunately, the state of manufactured housing right now is consolidating, which is really a shame. And I think like I said at the start, I think deconstructing that stigma for people and realizing that not only is it every bit as good as site built construction in many many ways, and largely because you can implement standards and enforce standards in a way that you can't with site built. You can't send, there can be a HUD inspector at every factory very easily inspecting every spot on that line. You can't really do it with stick frame. If there's 10,000 housing starts going on in the Portland area in any given year, an inspector can't they can't see every single thing. They can't, we try, we have an inspection protocol for it, but the reality is it's just not the same thing. So the quality control you can have in an indoor setting is just so much higher. And for something like housing, which is so critical, figuring out how to do that is really important. Sort of bring that out into you know, bringing it out of out of the shadows and really educating, kind of like you're talking about here with the mobile home park connection, which I think is so fantastic.
Yeah, it's crazy that the you mentioned the waste. They say that the waste, one manufactured home, it the waste that will fit into a small dumpster because, like you said, they reuse everything. And you're 100% correct on HUD standards. I mean, a lot of people don't realize that manufactured industry is regulated through HUD, right? And a state inspector can show up at any moment to these factories, any moment to your dealership, any moment to your job site. I mean, the regulation on these are really tight compared to a stick built house where you might get the town inspector that shows up. He might care and may not, he might not
Right.
care. So
Right.
these the quality of these manufactured homes are on a different level. And see, that's what we're trying to
Absolutely.
educate people on. And I'm glad you brought that up because that's a great point that you brought up. And yeah, they can't, like you said, 10,000 houses, these inspectors can't be all at the same place, but you can get a HUD inspector show up at any time to your dealership and say, hey, this house is not built right.
Sure.
This showed up to your dealership wrong and you need to fix it.
And they are. I mean, inspectors are in those factories every day. So it's not a
Yes,
hypothetical. And so the level of control is just a totally different thing. So yeah, it's definitely a different it's a different paradigm. I think one of the challenges is we're trying to fit it into a stick frame world where we're trying to bring manufactured components, or we're trying to have it fit in somehow. And I think that's going to be a challenge. I think also, obviously, like, we've talked about the stigma a little bit here too, right? The stigma exists because before 1976 there was no HUD and there really were no standards for manufactured homes, and that created some very legitimate safety problems that are sort of unfortunately still with the industry despite all of these new layers. And so that's kind of the good of it, right? Which is all the standardization we're talking about, the consolidation of manufacturing, the reduction of waste. That's the good side. The bad side is the stigma only took place on a very finite number of builders, but it was because it was all of them. I think that's kind of why it's pervaded throughout sort of like cheap, crappy housing. It's hard to beat that because there weren't, largely there was a small number of builders then. There's a relatively small number of manufacturing home builders now. So I think the unfortunately that's allowed that stigma to persist a little bit more than it otherwise would have, which is, that's the hard thing. I think you've touched on it many times, right? Which, like, if you don't know the industry, you're gonna assume, trailer park, trailer trash, and that's a very dangerous stigma in many ways.
absolutely. Yeah, the stigma is real. But in 2020, we had a huge, I mean, there was a big misconception. We had a lot of communities that overcharge for rent. We had a lot of smaller builders that went out of business and they got bought out by the Cavcos and the and Champion
Mhm.
Homes. And what are you seeing in the future for communities? Communities are growing largely right now. What's your take on communities in the next 10 years?
I think there's a little bit of a proliferation of manufactured or modular homes right now, which is sort of interesting, where you kind of see the tiny home movement, or you see, uh, a lot of these off-site high-tech type home builders. And I think on the one hand, it's good. I love seeing money coming into new building technologies. On the other hand, they're applying, I would say, sort of a technology startup attitude to what is a very regulated and very sort of restricted industry. And the initial pushback has been, if you're not gonna build something that can be certified, uh, you're not going to have a lot of traction. I think we're starting to see the rollback of that on the construction technology side, where they're building these really cool designs. I've toured a lot of those factories too, but until they get to where an inspector can certify it as a residential unit, it's going to be tough sledding. So I think that I'm hopeful that a lot of those technologies are going to get implemented in a manner that can be sort of inspected and regulated. So I think that's going to be my optimism says that some of those new building technologies are going to get like inserted into more conventional large scale building. So I think we will start to see a little more efficiency on the home side. Community the at least out here in the Pacific Northwest, like it's very difficult to build a new manufactured home park. I've built maybe two. And I'm one of the most prolific manufactured home park builders. So it just doesn't happen. So I think that my optimistic hope is that there's going to be more of a convergence around this is a great affordable housing solution. And we should now, instead of talking about just like low income housing tax credit apartments, we should look at building new manufactured home communities that allows for low income home ownership, which if you're in the park business, that's a very real thing where you can see someone who can buy a manufactured home, the park is well managed, and then sure enough, the value of that home goes up and they've paid down, a mortgage or just a loan to own payment or something. And that's allowed them to build wealth in the tens of thousands of dollars, which is, if you're someone making minimum wage, that's life changing money. So, we've seen that in our parks. So I'm hopeful that that will be a big transition in the next decade where this will start to be viewed as a real affordable housing solution. And we will see new parks getting built. I mean, and HUD actually has a manufactured home park construction loan. It hasn't been used in like 35 years. And no one really, when you talk to the loan brokerage community, that no one really knows what to do with it, but it does exist. And so I'm very hopeful that that will just kind of get dusted off and start to be used because it's fantastic financing. So I think there are some really great opportunities. I can't unfortunately say with certainty that that's going to happen, but I do think the convergence of new building technology coupled with this more and more pronounced need for genuine affordable housing solutions that sort of get beyond the tightly regulated environments of like affordable apartment construction, things like that. So I think the need is there, and I think the conversation is starting to change. And most importantly, I think the other benefit is that stigma is going away a little by little. People are seeing, new manufactured homes built to the same standard or higher, as you mentioned, than their stick frame counterparts. So I do see that changing now, and I really hope that that continues.
Yeah, in Arizona, we're having a hard time getting uh, communities also because of the lack of infrastructure. The bigger
Yeah,
cities, Phoenix, they do have them, but over northern Arizona, we don't have as many. Only because of infrastructure. It's hard to run septic and water to all these large areas. But in the Pacific Northwest, where you're at, why are you guys having a hard time getting communities started up over there?
the regulatory landscape's extraordinarily difficult. There is the long and short of it. It's just really hard to build anything. And if you're going to be a home builder and you're going to build out a 100 lot subdivision, if your choices are sell those lots and build, the median home price in Seattle is $950,000. So if you can sell that lot and put $1 million home on it and be done and sell out that subdivision in, 2, 3 years and then get all your money out versus try and build a park. And when the standards and regulations are effectively the same to build a 100 unit mobile home park as they are to build a 100 lot subdivision for luxury homes, the luxury home builder is going to win out. That you can't. So there's a price issue, there's a time issue there. While utilities, you're right. I mean, there's plenty of water here, but things like stormwater are extremely difficult and extremely expensive, and there's just not really the overall regulatory community doesn't seem to have any sense of urgency around housing at all. And I think that's something that when you're on the development side is very frustrating to see, where your average plans examiner or land use official really couldn't care less if your project gets approved or not. And so that creates just this massive backlog and this frustration. And again, if you're going to be a developer and your choices are try and produce, a $150,000 affordable home for a family, or a $1 million home where you can, and it's like so many of the costs are kind of the same. The development fees are the same. All of your offsite construction is the same. Your stormwater requirements are the same. It starts to get pretty difficult to make that $150,000 home make sense. And I think so. That's a challenge here, and that's one of the things that is really, I would say, the principal issue in bringing new manufactured home parks online. And there's some, I think there are some things that we're looking into as to how to make that happen with, again, kind of some of this new building technology, taking advantage of sort of different land use, different zoning. There's ways around it. But again, I think until that attitude changes, we're not really going to see large scale adoption of new manufactured housing parks coming online. It's certainly in the Northwest.
Yeah, for sure. What one more question on the rent strategy? What's your philosophy on the rent increases? We've seen the rent increases for COVID really jack up the prices, and I'm not sure if Bridgeview did any. I mean, we all had to raise our pricing due to inflation going up, but what's your philosophy on rent increases annually or market based?
Yeah, I mean, I think Oregon and Washington both now being rent controlled markets. I mean, it's unfortunately kind of out of our hands. We're in a rent regulated market. You sort of raise your rents to the maximum allowed by law, right? Because you have to plan for the future. And uh, we used to do very, very careful market rate analysis when we were doing rent increases. And one of the problems with rent control, it kind of takes that away. So even if you feel like your rents are at market, you don't know what's going to happen next year. You don't know what's happening the year after that. So you have like the regulatory environment really dictates our rent increases now. I would say the advantage of that is the rents don't really ever go down in a situation like that. And like for us, we're much more of kind of hands-on intensive, making improvements to the properties, reducing operating costs however possible, adding infill units however possible. So we, as a company, we're much more interested in increasing the value of the properties in ways that don't just involve increasing rents on the existing tenants. And in the Northwest, like you kind of have to do it that way. Fortunately, we've sort of always operated that way. We've taken affordability in our communities very seriously. So if I can keep your rent the same and figure out a way to add another unit or another 2 units, or reduce the water cost or the trash cost, or anything like that, that's what we're going to do preferentially. Also just there's a legitimate argument to adding another space, and that the amount of revenue you can create by adding new spaces versus just doing incremental rent increases. We have some sort of non-linear value increase options, and that's tends to be what we do in our properties.
Yeah, for sure. I own a manufactured home dealership and I own a construction company. I had a community contact me and they wanted to create 2 more spaces. I mean, they're trying to fit in any which way they can these units, or I mean, they're tiny lots. They can put a probably like a 1440 single wide in there. But you're exactly right. If they could fit in another home in there, that can help out with the rent increase, or with
Yeah,
offsetting some of the costs on the park, because it's expensive to run a park. I totally understand that, and you're exactly right. If you could fit in anything, maximize the space of your park. That's the way to do it for sure.
definitely. Definitely, yeah. There's anything like that, right? And we try and get creative where we do a lot of storage. We've even, we've partnered with like agriculture companies where we've got that inventory land that we can't expand onto. We try and get very creative with how we're going to take advantage of, generate revenue producing opportunities however we can. And again, in a rent controlled environment, we've really kind of gotten used to that. And so we were uniquely positioned to take on some pretty exciting new opportunities just because we kind of already had the infrastructure to do it, which is, not that not that I'm a fan of rent control, but from an investment standpoint, it does create some very interesting opportunities when you know how to add value to properties in ways beyond just raising rent.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm not a fan of rent control either, but there's got to be some kind of regulation. A lot of people, they got screwed out of their homes due to I see a rent increase, but when you go, 200% rent increase and people are
Right.
losing their homes, that's a whole different ballgame.
Right.
You got to be,
Exactly.
go with the rent increase with the cost of living increase. So,
Yeah.
Andrew, what is the one thing that worries you going into 2030 with manufactured homes?
It's kind of just the other side of the coin of my optimism, right? Which is that we somehow aren't able to get past the stigma and we aren't able to really educate the greater population about the potential, and it sort of stays as this sort of fringe byproduct of other housing types. So my fear really honestly is that it stays the same, right? Is that we don't make progress. And that is so if you and I are talking in 2030 and I'm sort of giving you the same, gosh, I hope things work out speech, that's my fear. I think fortunately I don't see that happening, but I would definitely like if you're, my realistic fear is just that, right? Is that we're not able to be successful in really getting this out there and demonstrating what low income home ownership can provide and the efficiency and just so many things that really manufactured housing solves. And it's really so much of it just tied, getting back to the start here, right? Of just that initial stigma of if you don't know what a manufactured home is, your sort of knee jerk base case that it's bad, right? It's gross, it's trailer trash, whatever.
Yeah, for sure. Exactly. I think moving into the future, 2030, these factors are getting a lot more. Um, they're getting bigger, faster. Production is moving faster, and they're moving right along. I think the factors are doing a good job, especially the big three players, Clayton, Cavco, and Champion. They're doing a good job, and they're doing a good job putting in different concepts and colors into these houses. These kitchens that they're coming out with, these bathrooms they're coming out with, rainfall shower heads, things like that. So they're competing in the stick belt world, that's for sure. And as far as outside the community now, do you also do manufactured homes outside of communities, spec homes?
We've done a handful. I think that is definitely, things when you talk about like the additional dwelling unit market. It's something we're actively looking at because I think there is tremendous potential, particularly when you're talking about, again, like the kind of like infill lots or additional dwelling units on existing residential land. I think particularly when you get into like, smaller park model type units, there's really a tremendous opportunity there as well. So it's not like I wouldn't say it's like in our core focus, but it's something we've done a handful of that in the past. It's definitely something that I personally would love to see implemented at a much greater scale.
Yeah, I think Arizona just passed the law last year where the setbacks are like 5 foot on the ADU unit, and they're allowing
Yep,
ADU as on a quarter acre lot. It's there's tremendous opportunity there for sure. You're
very
right.
much
You're right
so.
on that. Well,
Most cities in the Northwest have a very lenient ADU allowance, and manufactured homes just lend themselves perfectly, right? Where if you can just get a small structure into a confined space in an affordable way, now you're sort of, and then in a zoning efficient way too, where you're kind of, you're effectively doubling the density of that residential lot without really any change of use, without any big land use decision. I think there's tremendous potential there.
yeah, I always worry about that. You put, let's say you got 100 stick built homes and you put 100 ADU units in there, it's gonna increase the traffic by at least 100 extra cars in that community. So it's gonna be interesting.
It would. I think at least out here, I would say that's probably a good problem to have. I think the getting more housing where it's needed, I think is the first problem we need to solve. But I mean, you're right. There would be sort of byproducts, but I think particularly in the Northwest, for the most part, I mean, like delivering housing that's affordable is something that again something that manufactured housing has done and can continue to do. And as you mentioned, I mean, beyond outside of outside of parks, I think there's tremendous potential there as well.
Yeah, we had a customer call us on a ADU unit, and the cost, it's almost 40% cheaper to get an ADU
Yeah. Oh yeah.
modular manufactured home compared to building one. and
Of
people,
course.
they don't realize the savings.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So,
No,
but
it's a huge opportunity.
you have your house, you have your house, you have your modular done. What about service work and getting the setup done? Do you have a hard time finding construction work out in the Northwest?
Yes. I mean, I think we're fortunate that we maintain some pretty good construction project management expertise in house at Bridgeview. So that part of it, just by being at a certain scale really helps. And then we're fortunate that we've got some subcontractors that we work with pretty routinely. So we're able to kind of their quality of work is fantastic. We work with them enough where they make sure that to prioritize our projects. But it's definitely a challenge, particularly if you're sort of trying to do one-off work and things like that. Like it's a different thing. The permitting is entirely different from like stick frame construction. So yeah, in our particular case, we're at a scale and we've got a cadence and we're busy enough where we can kind of retain really good guys. But it's definitely a challenge. Definitely a challenge.
Yeah, for sure. It's a challenge all over the country. That's the biggest, besides getting the manufactured home built. But every industry has that challenge, right? I mean, you're gonna
Yep,
even with stick built homes, you're gonna find guys don't show up to the to framers don't show up, concrete guys don't show up. So it's a challenge everywhere. But yeah, you're right.
definitely.
If you're working on a large scale, it's a lot easier to keep a construction crew busy and
Yes.
have work for them constantly.
Yep.
That's
Yep.
for sure.
That's the key.
Now, do you guys own a dealership as well?
Yeah, in the sense that we are dealers. I don't have like a retail location necessarily. But yeah, I mean, we sort of work direct with factories, and like I mentioned, we've built a handful of homes directly in years past. We do work with some of the smaller scale tiny home builders on occasion. So yeah, it's like we try and we're principally a manufactured home park development and management company, and anything we can do to support that vision, we will do. And so obviously maintaining relationships direct with the factories by being a dealer in the states in which we operate is important.
Awesome. Awesome. Well, Andrew, I appreciate you letting me interview you. That was fantastic. And let me know or let everybody know where we can find you at.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really, really appreciate you doing this. I like that trying to get the word out about manufactured housing in general, I think is tremendously important. So I really appreciate you doing this and taking the time to, educate and do exactly what and inform people about this industry and the promise and the potential of it, which is just fantastic. So thank you for doing that. Bridgeviewassetmanagement.com, like check out the website. We've got a lot of sort of everything I've got going on. Then you can find me on LinkedIn. I post a lot of articles and things on the website and on my LinkedIn or the Bridgeview page as well. So that's probably the best place. The stuff that you and I have talked about. I've done some pretty deep dives on pretty much all of it on things like rent control, tiny homes, new park development. I've written pretty extensively on the subject. So if you have more interest, feel free to contact me or just check out the website or check out my LinkedIn.
Awesome. Andrew, I totally appreciate it. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, man. Thanks, Eric. It's great talking with you.